Okay, if we move on to think about the kind of dangers that children face online, and this to a certain extent is true of all age groups. If you're not convinced of the need for us to be concentrating on this, then I'd encourage you to watch the Where's Klaus video. It's 60 seconds, 90 seconds in length. It's the kind of thing that you could use on parents' evenings with parents to get them thinking about their responsibilities with children's online behaviour. It's a really good movie. So if you want to take a second now to pause this and follow the link that's in my Beckett to the Where's Klaus movie, please do feel free. The model that you see in front of you is a model that I published a number of years ago. And in it, I was trying to encapsulate the different threats that are there for children as they're growing up online. So you can see there are three very specific threats within a larger context of inappropriate content and inappropriate behaviour. And I'll try to get you thinking about these things as we move forward. The reason that the three circles, so cyberbullying, mutual online sexual activity, and stranger activity, are interlinking to a certain amount, is that there's lots of evidence to suggest actually that in some cases it's the online sexual activity of children that can actually lead to cyberbullying and can lead to stranger activity as well in some cases. So it's a connection that it's important that we acknowledge. So if you want to start by thinking about what kind of inappropriate content there is out there online for children to be exposed to, and if we were teaching this class in a lecture theatre or in a classroom, I'd get you to do this as a group activity, and you'd be telling me about materials that are unsuitable for children, such as pornography, perhaps gambling websites. Got sites that contain violence, etc., etc. And it is important to acknowledge that this content is out there. But what I also wanted to bring about with this model is that actually some of that content can develop into inappropriate behaviours and can reinforce negative behaviours or inappropriate behaviours. So, for instance, pornography, we know, has an impact particularly on young boys into what they think sexual relationships are and normal romantic relationships are. So it skews their view. So the content can actually influence behaviour. We know that there are websites out there that promote, for instance, suicide, and we had an awful case in Wales several years ago where a number of teenagers committed suicide very close together because they basically accessed a particular website that had taken them through the processes that they needed to consider and actually encourage them to do this. So there's an issue with content, but there's also an issue with how that influences children's behaviour, and it's something that we've got to be conscious of. So within that context of content and behaviour, we have these three more explicit dangers. And the first one is mutual online sexual activity, which is interesting. And what we're talking about here is things like sexting that children do online. So the sending of sexual messages, images, videos, often of themselves to other people. The sharing of things that they find, or sharing of things that are sent to them by others that are very sexual in nature. And it's an interesting context, isn't it? Because in a lot of ways, children are getting much more savvy. 36% less children drink over the last 10 years. Smoking amongst children has halved over a 10-year period. Conception rates amongst under 16s has halved over a 10-year period. Yet, as I sort of alluded to before in the previous video, children make even though they're confident with technology, they make bad decisions with technology in a lot of cases. So they do take part in things like sexting, where they're actually in many cases voluntarily taking part in this online sexual activity, but it can have really negative effects. And there's a video link there that you can follow in my Beckett, the sexting video, which is it's a video produced by CEOP, and it's a really hard-hitting video that is used with children in high schools actually. But it does all come back to this idea that people behave differently online. You know, think back to our friend here from the short video that I shared with you earlier. People do act differently online, and this is never more true than when it comes to things like mutual online sexual activity. And this is an old headline now, just a typical one. Primary schools are excluding children as young as 5 for sexual misconduct in a trend being blamed on internet pornography. So we know that this is starting to have a real impact on how young children start to develop their identity. It's starting to have an impact on how they think about romantic relationships and being part of couples and that kind of thing. So it's having a really negative impact on children. Now, linked to, if you remember from the model, linked to mutual online sexual activity in some cases, but not in others, is this notion of cyberbullying. So, cyberbullying is, I would define it as intimidation or harassment using digital technology, but between children. Okay, so if you are an adult that is bullying a child using technology, then that wouldn't be cyberbullying really. So we're going to concentrate on child to child. Very insidious. It reveals a very negative side of our society that this stuff goes on, but it has devastating effects on children. Cyberbullying has led to suicides amongst children. It leads to children having really traumatizing experiences at school and in their lives, and there's a reason why it is so awful that we're going to go on to talk about. That if you look at the PowerPoint on my Beckett, there are different links on the screen there that take you to different. There's a radio interview, and there's a piece of video footage as well there for you to look at. But cyberbullying is a real scourge of society at the moment. So if we were to define cyberbullying, then exactly as I've just said, this is bullying between children or between under 18s that's done using some form of digital technology. Where is cyberbullying most prevalent? Over many years now, it's most prevalent in chat. So when children are using apps or websites that have a chat function, this is where cyberbullying is most prevalent. So again, as a teacher, this is something for you to be on the lookout for. Children that are spending a lot of time in chat rooms, on chat functions, that kind of thing. Studies have pointed towards a notion that, you know, when children send an offensive message to another one, once that message has disappeared off the top of the chat screen, it's gone. So they feel much less ownership over that bullying action. Obviously, we know that it never actually disappears. How many 12 to 17-year-olds have been cyberbullied? I'll take that with the next question. How many Year 6 primary school children have been cyberbullied? It's difficult to tell because different studies have different definitions of cyberbullying. But we think for both questions, we're actually talking about between 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 children. So it's a massive problem. And what do you think could make bullying online common? Statistics point to this being a problem that impacts girls more than boys. Now, that's not to say that boys don't do it, and it's not to say that boys don't suffer from it, because that could not be further from the truth. But it's particularly common amongst girls, both as the bullier and the person being bullied as well. So again, some little clues there for you, for things to be looking at with the children and pupils that you're working with. If you've never seen cyberbullying, never experienced it, then, I mean, congratulations, but there are some examples up here. Facebook page there, you're ugly and fat, you have no friends and no one will ever love you. Why do you even bother coming to school anymore, freak? And then various other people from Facebook adding in comments on the left-hand side there. On the right-hand side, do us all a favour and kill yourself. Go commit suicide but succeed, please. Go die, go cut yourself and die. This is just a tirade of abuse against a young girl, and it's disgraceful and disgusting behaviour, but it has a massive impact on the victims. And the reason it has a massive impact is, there are three reasons. We have three reasons that I think make cyberbullying much more insidious even than bullying in a playground, bullying in a classroom. You have, first of all, in many cases, the anonymity of the bully. So the bully won't always be known or won't always be visible in the bullying. So more often than not, it'll be someone in the victim's class or someone in the victim's circle. But that doesn't necessarily mean that when these messages are coming through on social media or wherever, that they can actually identify who it is that's sending them. So the fact that you don't know in a lot of cases who it is that's sending you these awful messages adds another level of fear and another level of, as I say, insidiousness. In many cases, you've got the public medium as well, so you never know as the victim who else can see those messages, who else is sitting at the other end of that screen or the other end of that phone that's witnessing all this. So that adds again to the fear factor. And you've also got the lack of a refuge as well. So if you, bullying traditionally, when I was a boy, bullying happened in the playground, and it's an awful thing. I suppose the positive is that it ended at 3:30 when kids went home and they went back to their families and they went back to their homes, and started again the next day. Obviously, with cyberbullying, if a child has access to a mobile phone, to an internet-enabled TV in their room, to an iPad, a tablet, a laptop, etc., they can never escape from that. From the bullies having access to them. They can do certain things to make sure that they're not bullied, cyberbullied in future, like they can change their profiles, etc., etc. But actually, children don't necessarily want to do that because they want to know what's being said about them as well. They don't want to disappear and cut themselves off from this because they may be missing out on positive things, but they also want to know what's being said on there about them. So there's a real lack of a refuge. There's a lack of somewhere where you can go and be protected from it, and that obviously has a massive impact on mental health. One of the things that we do with bullies in a playground is we deal with the bystander effect. So teachers will, if there's a fight or if there's an argument or some bullying taking place in a playground, one of the things that you do is you deal with the observers, you deal with the audience, you get people away from the situation, and that in itself often will calm things down and resolve things. How do you do that? That's one of our sort of key tactics with bullying and with that kind of thing. But how do you do that with cyberbullying? You can't. So it's an awful offence, and it is a criminal offence, and that's something that a message that we also need to get over to children. So you've got the Public Order Act, you've got the Communications Act, you've got the Telecommunications Act, you've got the Malicious Communications Act, you've got Protection from Harassment Act. These are things that there are arguments in society at different times where people say, we need a cyberbullying act, we need an act of parliament about cyberbullying, and we do not need one from a punishment point of view. We can use these 5 acts just to start with, to arrest people, to punish people, etc., etc. The one thing that does make me support that argument for a cyberbullying act is that it would put cyberbullying back in the news. It would put it back in the public conscience, because that's the message that we need to get over to the people that are doing this, is that these are things that you can be punished for. You can get a criminal record. You can do time for this stuff. So just to reiterate, we have the inappropriate content and inappropriate behaviours, and within that we have mutual online sexual activity, which children often opt into themselves because they want to show that they're developing and maturing and that they are becoming sexual beings. In some cases, that's connected to cyberbullying because children put materials out there that then attract bullies. But certainly by no means all the time, and certainly by no means is that even more than half the time that we have cyberbullying. But there is a connection. I would remind you of a case that we had probably 3 summers ago now, where a young boy was in his bedroom. I think it was sort of 13, 14 years old, at home with his phone, and he was desperately in lust with a girl in his class, and he was suffering some awful cyberbullying, and this came to the public's attention because of the nature of the cyberbullying that he'd experienced, and the fact that his mum had decided to take him out of school and this kind of thing. But actually what had happened was, in the first place, and this is not defending cyberbullying by any stretch, but what had happened was he'd been at home in his room with his phone, and he decided to take a photo of his genitalia to send to this girl that he liked in class. And it had been on, I think it's Snapchat, where it just appears for a couple of seconds and then disappears again. But this girl had received this photograph of his genitalia on Snapchat. She screenshotted it, and then she'd shared it amongst everyone else in school, in class, which led to some awful cyberbullying that this young boy suffered. But in this case, this is something that he'd actually instigated this in a way by sending out this ridiculous image. So there are these connections there. On the other side, there are connections to stranger activity as well. So sometimes the kind of things that children put online actually draw in strangers to them, and obviously in a lot of cases it's nothing to do with that at all. So with stranger activity, then, this is it's one of those things where the idea of someone grooming a child online, we find out about these things when we find out about them. So we can't say that it's happened this many times, or it's this common. We don't really know how common it is, but we do have we can say that there's minimal evidence of children that are being groomed and then sexually assaulted by someone who's lied. And we do actually think that, statistically speaking, it's an activity that is diminishing over time, so it's less common than it was a couple of years ago. But we can't say for sure. What we do know is that 25% of youngsters, according to Warlock's study, admit to communicating and sharing details with strangers, and 5% of youngsters admit to communicating and sharing details of a sexual nature with strangers. So what you need to think about as teachers is, if that's my class at the bottom of the screen there, which of the children are most likely to respond positively to a message from a stranger? Okay, so start to think about the children that might not have the same social circles in school, the children that might not have the same ability to make friends, the children that might be more comfortable chatting to someone online that they don't know than they are going out and kicking a football around or playing in the playground or joining a club at school, etc., etc. So when you get into your roles, when you get into your jobs, start to think about that. If you sort of start with the notion that one of the children in my class, statistically speaking, would be willing to share details of a sexual nature with a stranger online, that makes you start to think about the kind of things that you do in class, and it makes you start to think about which children would it be, what kind of signals, what kind of signs do you pick up from children in relation to this. Now, in fairness, most children deflect messages of a sexual nature when they come to them, especially when they come to them from someone that they don't know. As we've said before, children can be very savvy and very confident online. So, but as I've just stated there, as I've just asked you, ask yourselves which ones are the ones that are most likely not to deflect that kind of message. And what we tend to find, or what certainly O'Connell found in her research, is that there's a 5-phase process to grooming, and this can happen at different speeds depending on the situation. But what we tend to find, and this research, by the way, was conducted by, she interviewed convicted paedophiles that were both in prison and had been released from prison, and then analysed what they'd said about the process that they went through. But you tend to find there's a friendship forming stage, initial, almost icebreaker, getting to know a person online, trying to find out about interests, that kind of thing. There's then a relationship forming stage where the person doing the grooming would be trying to not exactly romanticize the situation, but starting to really develop that friendship and make the person, make the victim feel that this person on the other end of the screen or whatever it is more has got their best interests at heart. There's a risk assessment stage, which pretty much revolves around the groomer trying to identify where the child is in relation to other adults. Are they at school? Are they in the house? Can anyone else see the screen? That kind of thing. And does anyone else have access to the email account or to the Facebook page, etc.? And then there's an exclusivity stage where they start to try and really zero in on, it's just you and me. There's no one else that I can talk to about this kind of thing. You're the only person that I've spoken to about this kind of thing. Really trying to make that child feel special. And then there's a sexualized stage as well, where the offender might send sexual images, and if they're sort of pretending to be a 12-year-old girl somewhere, they might send a pornographic image and say, "Oh, what do you think to this? This is disgusting." But they're starting a conversation about sex then. Elena Martellozzo, the quote at the bottom of the screen there, her book is absolutely tremendous. I would recommend it to anyone that's interested in this as a subject area. They're able to contact anyone, anywhere, anytime. Furthermore, cyberspace provides the offender with an inflated sense of security. And they use different techniques to move through those stages. So bribery, flattery, threats, blackmail, even sort of record, paying attention to when they're going through that sort of relationship forming and exclusivity stage, if they're picking up things that are secrets about other kids in class, or things that a child might not want their parents to find out about. It's very easy to blackmail a young child when they think that they are going to get into trouble for saying something to this stranger online, or for revealing something to this stranger online. And as I've already stated with the sexual stage, this idea of desensitization using pornography. So it's a terrible process that children go through. But as teachers, be on the lookout. Are there children that seem to be abnormally fixated with a particular messaging system or social media? Are the children that want to go somewhere else in order to access the phones or log online, that kind of thing? So you're just picking up for little clues that might indicate that someone is at some point on this five stage process.